35 degrees below zero. Engine oil turns into glue. Rubber shatters on impact, and skin freezes to metal. In conditions like these, war ceases to be an art form and transforms into a frozen hell. German tankers watched in horror as their high-tech machines died without a single shot fired, simply because they were built for parades, not survival. Today, we dive into the nightmare of the Eastern Front, where victory didn't go to the side with the thickest armor, but to the side that could start their engines. I will tell you the grim facts they don't print in textbooks, how crews kept warm by huddling against red-hot transmissions in toxic fumes, why German sniper scopes became useless pieces of glass, and how Soviet tanks kept moving even with punctured radiators and jammed levers. You will see how General Frost and the Steppe Dust conducted the most brutal crash test in human history, and why the rough, cramped, and ugly T-34 became a nightmare for Aryan aces. The Zeiss stereo telescope with coated optics provides an image so sharp it feels like you could reach out and touch the black smoke on the horizon. Lenses don't lie. People do. November 1941, near Moscow. The air temperature drops to 15 degrees below 0 Celsius. The ground has hardened, turning into a concrete abrasive capable of devouring track pins in a single march. But for the staff officers of the 4th Panzer Group of the Wehrmacht, this doesn't matter. Through their eyepieces, they don't see a defensive line, they see a finish line. Their confidence is based not on faith, but on technical specifications. The German war machine works like a perfectly tuned mechanism, a chronometer. Every gear tooth meshes with micron-level tolerance. Officers stand near their horch, and their greatcoats look impeccable. No mud. Mud is for the infantry and for the Russians. Here, at the command post, a cult of cleanliness and order reigns. They look to the east, and in their eyes one reads not fear, but the disdain of professionals for amateurs. The colonel lowers his binoculars. Leather gloves creak as he squeezes the cold metal housing. 30 kilometers to the Kremlin as the crow flies, he says, looking at the map spread out on the hood. If intelligence is to be believed, they only have militia and a few battalions with obsolete BT-7s, tin cans on wheels. We ground down their main forces back in October, Colonel, the adjutant replies, adjusting his map case. The Russians are rolling out everything that can move. Yesterday, the repair company reported a captured specimen. The weld seams look like they were done by a blind man in the dark. The armor is delaminating. This isn't machinery. It's the agony of industry. The adjutant laughs. The laugh sounds confident. He knows what he is talking about. He has seen the reports from Daimler-Benz engineers. The German school of design is the triumph of mind over matter. Every bolt, every shaft, every bearing in a German tank has passed multi-stage quality control. This is a philosophy of superiority embodied in alloy steel. They are used to fighting an enemy who plays by the rules. Poland, France. There the war went according to staff calculations. Fuel consumption matched the standards. Engine life matched the factory's warranty obligations. Here, in Russia, this ideal world began to crack, but the inertia of thinking is more terrible than any enemy. They still believe that war is a competition of technologies, where the winner is the one with the more complex blueprints. Around the command post, Panzer III and IV tanks are dispersed. Their Maybach engines are idling. 12 cylinders, water coolant, gasoline. The sound of the motors is even, low, mesmerizing. It is the sound of civilization. Crews wipe sight optics with special wipes. Drivers check track tension. Everything is done by the book. The German field manual does not provide for improvisation. It provides for the execution of an algorithm. Have you heard about the new Russian tank? asks the adjutant, pointing with a pencil at the sector of fire. The infantry talks about some sloped sides. Rumors, cuts off the colonel. Fear breeds monsters. Engineering intelligence does not confirm the Bolsheviks have the technology for mass production of anything more serious than a tractor. To make sloped armor, you need presses of such power that they simply don't have. To make a reliable diesel, you need a manufacturing culture they won't have for another 100 years. We are fighting barbarians, Gunther. Barbarians can be vicious, but they cannot build a complex machine. In this dialogue lies the fatal error of the entire campaign. The Germans judge the enemy by their own standards. They look for complexity where functionality reigns. They look for aesthetics where there is only the naked expediency of killing. For a German engineer, a tank is a bespoke product, a work of art requiring skilled maintenance every 200 kilometers. For a Soviet designer, a tank is a consumable, a projectile. It only needs to live long enough to destroy the enemy before it burns itself. The cold penetrates under the cloth of the greatcoats, but the officers ignore it. They also ignore the fact that the lubricant in their tank's transmissions is starting to thicken. Mineral oil loses its fluidity. But while the motors are hot, it's unnoticeable. The illusion of control remains. In their reality, war is a chess game where pieces move across squares, not crawl through mud.
Artillery preparation starts in 15 minutes.
The colonel looks at his wristwatch. Swiss mechanism. Flawless precision. Then the armored wedges will go in. We will enter Moscow before the real frosts hit. And what about the roads? The adjutant asks cautiously. Logistics is lagging. Fuel trucks are stuck 20 kilometers back. The roads are frozen, the colonel answers confidently. Now they are autobahns. The mud has frozen, Gunther. The Russian mud that held us for a month has now become our ally. Solid ground under the tracks is all the panzers need for victory. He is mistaken. The frozen mud did not become an ally. It became an anvil. The ground turned as hard as granite, but it remained uneven. The German suspension, with its interleaved road wheels, created for a smooth ride and crew comfort, experiences extreme loads on these ruts. Torsion bars are twisted with an amplitude not foreseen by any testing ground in Kummersdorf. Metal fatigues. Microcracks have already run along the suspension arms, invisible to the eye, but inevitable as the laws of physics. But they don't know this yet. They see a snow-covered field and a sparse forest ahead. The silence is deceptive. Deep in that forest, there is no panic. There is no chaos painted by German propaganda. There is cold calculation and waiting. Look at that hill. The colonel raises his binoculars to his eyes again. An ideal position for an anti-tank battery. But it's empty. They are running, Gunther. They are abandoning positions because they understand there is no defense against a sledgehammer. Our equipment is the absolute. Through the Zeiss eyepieces, the wind can be seen driving drifting snow across the field. White silence. German optics allow one to make out individual blades of grass sticking out from under the snow at a distance of 2 kilometers. But it doesn't allow one to see the main thing. It doesn't show what is hidden under camouflage nets and pine boughs. It doesn't show the crude, graceless, but deadly force that is already warming up its engines. "Start the engines," commands the colonel, snapping his watch lid shut. The metallic click sounds like a verdict, but not a verdict for those to whom it is addressed. Dozens of engines roared. Blue exhaust smoke hit the frosty air. Tanks, clanking their tracks, moved from their spots, a beautiful, geometrically precise formation. Turrets turned toward the enemy. Muzzle brakes of the guns look at the horizon. This is a triumph of engineering. This is the peak of development of Western mechanical civilization. machines created for dominance. They go into the attack, confident that their armor is impenetrable and their guns hit more accurately than sniper rifles. They are driving to die, but their onboard computers, human brains saturated with propaganda, refuse to process this information. The euphoria of blitzkrieg has switched off the instinct of self-preservation. They forgot the first law of mechanics. Action equals reaction. And the force of reaction, accumulated in the frozen Russian forests, is already ready to be unleashed. The tank wedge picks up speed. 50 tons of German steel for every machine. Confidence in every movement of the levers. They don't know that the era of their technical dominance ended exactly the second they decided the war was won. The trap snapped shut, not when the frosts hit. The trap snapped shut now, when they believed in their own invulnerability. "Forward!" screams the adjutant over the roar of engines. "Let's show them what German quality is!" Ahead is only snow and silence. The silence before the blow that will shake not the earth, but the very concept of modern war. While German officers were wiping their binocular lenses with chamois cloth, 1,000 kilometers to the east, in the workshops of the Kharkov locomotive factory, the air was thick with ozone and profanity. There was no sterility of laboratories here. There were no white coats here. There was soot embedding itself into pores forever, and the eye-cutting light of electric welding. The Soviet answer to German technical perfection was born not in the silence of offices, but in the thunder of pneumatic hammers. This wasn't creativity in the high sense of the word. It was a race for survival, where the designer's stake was not a bonus, but the life of the state. Chief designer Mikhail Koshkin hadn't slept for 3 days. His face had taken on a gray, earthy hue characteristic of people working themselves to exhaustion. He coughed, pressing a handkerchief to his lips, on which pink spots remained. Pneumonia was already devouring his lungs, but he ignored the fever, just as his future tank was supposed to ignore shell hits. In the office, buried under blueprints, hung the heavy smell of tobacco and cheap solvent. On the table lay not just a sketch of a combat vehicle, there lay a mathematical model of survival. "We can't make vertical sides," Koshkin wheezes, poking a pencil lead into the hull cross-section. "Vertical armor is death. German guns will punch through 45 millimeters of steel like paper. We need an angle." "Sloping the armor eats up useful volume, Mikhail Ilyich," objects the lead layout engineer. He has eyes red from lack of sleep and hands black from graphite. "The crew will be cramped. The loader has nowhere to turn around. If we slope the front plate at 60 degrees, the driver's hatch will have to be cut directly into the armor. This will weaken the structure." "To hell with comfort." Koshkin's voice sounds hard, like metal striking metal. A tank is not a limousine for joy rides. A tank is a means of delivering fire. If we make straight sides, the crew will be comfortable, but they will be dead 5 minutes into the battle. If we slope the armor, the shell will ricochet. Physics, damn it. The cosine of the slope angle doubles the effective thickness of the armor. 45 millimeters turns into 90. 90 millimeters of steel that we physically don't have in weight, but which we have geometrically. It was a fundamental dispute between two philosophies. The German school went down the path of increasing thickness. More steel, more weight, more powerful engine, more complex transmission. The Soviet school, cornered by a deficit of resources, went down the path of paradox. Unable to make the armor thicker, they forced geometry to work for protection. A sloped sheet deflects the kinetic energy of a solid shot, not by the strength of the material, but by the vector of force. In the neighboring shop, where prototypes were being assembled, a battle was waging for the heart of the machine. The V2 engine. Diesel. 12 cylinders. 500 horsepower. It was an engineering madness of the time. The whole world built tanks on gasoline. Gasoline ignites instantly. Gasoline vapors explode from a spark. Diesel fuel burns reluctantly. But making a lightweight, high-speed diesel out of aluminum alloy was a task on the brink of a technological foul. "The cylinder block warped again during casting," shouts the foundry foreman, drowning out the hum of the crane. "Aluminum won't hold the shape. Too many defects. Let's go back to cast iron." "Cast iron adds half a ton of weight," yells the engine specialist in response, wiping grease from his forehead. "The Christie suspension won't hold it. The torsion bars will snap to hell. Only aluminum."
We will cast until we get it right.
The V2 was finicky, complex, and expensive to produce, but it gave the machine something the Germans didn't have: range and fire safety. It was a risk, a huge risk. Aluminum was a strategic raw material for aviation. A tank diesel made of the winged metal was a luxury only a madman or a genius seeing the war 10 moves ahead could afford. In the design bureau, they didn't discuss seat ergonomics. They discussed traverse angles and turret rotation speed. The T-34 was designed as a weapon of limit parameters. Every extra kilogram of weight spent on comfort was taken away from ammunition or fuel. "The mechanic's hatch is turning out too heavy," reports an engineer entering Koshkin's office. "The spring compensator can't handle it. If the driver is wounded, he won't be able to open it from the inside." "Then he will burn with the machine." Koshkin doesn't look up from the test run map.
But if we don't install this hatch, thousands of others will burn. This is war, not a sanatorium. We are not making a safety capsule. We are making a hammer. There was no cruelty in these words. There was the dry logic of an engineer who understands the price of compromise. The German engineer thought about how to save the life of a professional crew, creating complex fire suppression and evacuation systems. The Soviet engineer thought about how to save the combat capability of the army, creating a machine that could be produced by the thousands. The assembly of the first machines was done by hand. Welders laid seams, cursing everything on earth. Electrodes hissed, metal warped. High-hardness armor plates cracked upon cooling. They had to change technology on the fly. They changed the flux composition, changed current modes. This wasn't factory work. It was laboratory work on the scale of heavy industry. "Look at this seam," says an old master to a young welder, pointing to the joint of the turret and hull. "Rough, ugly, bumpy. A German would shoot you for this. Now hit it with a sledgehammer." The young guy strikes. The ringing is so loud it blocks the ears. The seam holds. "Exactly," nods the master. "Ugly, but deadly. We aren't going to an exhibition in Paris. We are going to hell. And in hell, aesthetics don't count." The tank turned out low, predatory, squat. It looked not like a fortress, but like a flattened drop of mercury. Wide tracks were ready to churn mud in which any European analog would drown. The transmission was primitive. The gearbox required the physical strength of a blacksmith from the driver to shift gears. The levers beat against hands, breaking fingers upon a mistake. But the machine moved. It moved fast, aggressively, tearing up space with the roar of an unbroken-in diesel. Koshkin walked out of the shop into the frosty air. A coughing fit bent him double. He spat a clot of blood into the dirty snow. Time was running out. The tank was ready in metal, but it still had to be proven in Moscow. A Kharkov-Moscow run under its own power. Madness. A mockery of machinery and people. But only this way could high officials in the Kremlin be convinced that this raw, unfinished machine was the only chance for salvation. "Fill them to the brim," he commands, wiping his lips. "Take spare parts, cables, logs. We leave at dawn."
They were forging not just a tank, they were forging a tool that was supposed to break the spine of the most perfect military machine in human history. They were embedding into this metal a philosophy of brute force, simplicity, and mass production. When the factory gates swung open, releasing 2 prototypes into the gray morning gloom, it was like beasts exiting a cage. Engines smoked, the clanking of tracks echoed through the industrial zone. Koshkin climbed onto the armor, feeling the vibration of the hull transmit to his whole body. This wasn't the trembling of fear. It was the pulse of a predator born in agony. A predator that hadn't tasted blood yet, but was already created for killing. Ahead was a long road. Ahead was the unknown. And somewhere out there in the west, the tracks of the enemy were already thundering. An enemy who didn't even suspect that his death sentence had just driven out of the gates of a Kharkov factory. The first collision of these 2 worlds was inevitable, like the collision of tectonic plates. And the epicenter of this earthquake would be a dot on the map called Mtsensk. October 6th, 1941. The Orel-Mtsensk Highway. The morning is foggy, damp, the air saturated with moisture that muffles sounds but cannot hide the trembling of the earth. General Colonel Heinz Guderian, the creator of Blitzkrieg theory, is used to hearing this trembling as the music of his offensive.
But today the rhythm is off. Instead of the familiar victorious crescendo of tank engines, he hears a strange, ear-piercing screech. It is not the sound of an engine. It is the sound of metal refusing to die. At the position stands the crew of a 37mm PaK-36 anti-tank gun. The German artillerymen work like automatons. The loader jams a shell into the breech. The gunner catches the silhouette emerging from the tree line in the crosshairs. Range, 400 meters. For German optics, this is a point-blank shot. The tank in the sight is moving fast, too fast for such a massive machine. The gunner leads the target. Fire. The sharp crack of the gun tears the silence. The tracer draws a perfect straight line to the target. The shell hits precisely on the front plate of the Russian tank. The gun crew freezes in anticipation of the explosion, smoke, the machine stopping. This is the standard algorithm. A hit equals destruction. But instead of an explosion, a piercing, vibrating howl rings out. The shell, striking the sloped armor, strikes a sheaf of sparks and goes into the sky, tumbling like a useless piece of iron. "Ricochet!" shouts the observer, not believing his eyes. "Another one! Fire!" The tank doesn't stop. It doesn't even slow down. It is the T-34. Its sloped armor, that very controversial geometric risk of designer Koshkin, is now turning the kinetic energy of the German shell into nothing. Physics is working against the Wehrmacht. The angle of the shell meeting the armor is so acute that the steel core simply slides off, failing to bite into the metal. German soldiers reload the gun with trembling hands. They call this gun the Army Door Knocker for its lightweight and convenience. Now this nickname takes on a sinister meaning. They are knocking on a door that cannot be opened. They strike the armor like a tombstone and receive in return only the echo of their own helplessness. "Armor piercing! Distance 200!" yells the non-commissioned officer. His voice breaks into a falsetto. The T-34 is already close. The roar of its diesel is audible, rough, bubbling, unlike the high pitch of German gasoline engines. Tracks tear out chunks of turf. The tank rocks on bumps, but the barrel of its 76mm F-34 gun looks exactly at the German battery. Inside the Soviet machine is hell. There is no internal communication. Headsets crackle with static. The driver sees almost nothing through the narrow slit of the periscope, splashed with mud. He drives the machine by touch, guided by the commander's commands,
who kicks him on the shoulders with his boot. Left shoulder, left. Right, right. A kick to the head, stop. It is primitive control, but it works.
"Solid shot!"
Yells the radio operator gunner as another German shell hits the side and bounces off. Inside the tank, this sound is like a sledgehammer hitting an empty bucket that you are sitting in. Ears are blocked. Scale rains down from the seams. But the armor holds. The weld seams, which German experts called rough, do not split. The Soviet tank doesn't shoot. It simply drives. 30 tons of steel at a speed of 40 kilometers per hour possess colossal momentum. The driver presses the fuel pedal, driving the pump rack to the limit. The V2 diesel expels a cloud of black smoke and roars at maximum RPMs. The German crew abandons the gun a second before impact. People scatter to the sides, falling into the mud. The wide track with its characteristic waffle pattern rolls over the carriage of the Pak-36. A crunch is heard. It is the sound of the German artillery's bones breaking. The elegant mechanism of the gun, with its sights, aiming handwheels, and breech, turns into a flat metal pancake pressed into the autumn slush. "My God, they are crushing us like bugs!" A panicked scream from a German tank platoon commander rushes through the airwaves. "My shells are bouncing off! I hit him in the turret from 500 meters, but he just turned the barrel and burned my machine." Guderian's tanks, the famous Panzer IVs with short 75mm stump guns, find themselves in the role of victims. Their shells are intended for infantry and pillboxes. They have low muzzle velocity. They are powerless against the sloped armor of the 34. German tankers see their shells leaving only black pockmarks on the green paint of the Soviet machines. This is not a fight. This is a beating. The technical superiority Germans believed in like a religion is collapsing right before their eyes. It turns out that armor thickness in millimeters in a catalogue doesn't matter if the designer didn't account for the angle of impact. It turns out that the surface finish quality of a shell isn't important if its caliber is insufficient. Guderian watches the rout through binoculars. His face turns to stone. He sees his tanks burning. He sees the T-34 turning on the spot with fountains of mud from under its tracks disappear into the forest, leaving behind a smoking graveyard of Wehrmacht equipment. For the first time in the entire war, from Poland to France, Fast Heinz feels a cold, sticky fear. Not for his life, for the outcome of the war. "That's impossible," whispers a staff officer standing nearby. "The Russians can't have such a tank. It contradicts all intelligence data." "You can use the intelligence data in the latrine," Guderian answers sharply. "We have encountered something that changes all the rules of the game. Until today, we fought men. Now we are fighting engineering that surpasses ours." On the battlefield near Mtsensk lies not just twisted metal. There lie the fragments of the myth of German weapon invincibility. The T-34 passed the combat test. Its transmission howled, clutches burned, ventilation couldn't handle powder gases, crews passed out from fumes. But the machine fulfilled its main function. It survived where it should have died, and killed those who considered themselves immortal hunters. For the first time, the phrase tank fear appears in German reports. It is not a fear of tanks in general. It is a paralyzing horror before a specific silhouette with sloped armor that cannot be stopped by standard means. German soldiers realize with horror that their rifles, machine guns, and even light cannons are useless junk. "Request aviation immediately," shouts the radio operator in the German staff armored personnel carrier. "Target not affected by ground means."
"Repeat, target invulnerable to standard artillery."
But aviation won't come. Low cloud cover presses the Luftwaffe to the ground. The Germans are left one-on-one with the Russian monster. And in this confrontation, victory goes not to the one with the prettier uniform, but to the one whose designer correctly calculated ricochet angles. And in the forest, cooling down and crackling with metal, stands that very T-34. The crew tumbles out of the hatches, greedily gulping cold air, faces black with soot, hands trembling from tension. The commander inspects the armor. On the front plate is a deep groove, ending in a torn scratch going into the sky. A trace from a German shell. "Didn't get through," he says hoarsely, running a finger over the hot metal. "She's alive, the darling." He pats the armor the way one pats a horse's withers. There is no pathos in this gesture. There is only gratitude to the machine that offered its steel shoulder under a mortal blow. The tank breathes heat, smells of diesel fuel and burnt oil. It is imperfect. It is cramped. It is rough. But that very roughness became salvation. Mtsensk became a turning point. The Blitzkrieg stumbled. The German chronometer skipped a beat, and the second hand froze. The war ceased to be an easy walk. It turned into heavy, dirty work of grinding iron, for which German equipment turned out to be unprepared. And ahead was winter. And if Russian metal withstood fire, it remained to be seen if German metal would withstand ice. General Frost was already preparing his final exam, and retakes were not provided. The thermometer on the wall of the commandant's office in Klin shows -32 degrees. The mercury column has shrunk, as if trying to hide from reality. But for machinery, this isn't just a number. It is a physical threshold beyond which the aggregate states of substances change. December 1941 turned the Moscow region into a cryogenic chamber, where survival goes not to the smartest, but to the most adapted. The German tank army, which just yesterday seemed like a steel tsunami, has today turned into a museum of ice sculptures. Perfectly fitted Maybach engine parts played a cruel joke on their creators. Micron tolerances, of which engineers in Stuttgart were so proud, became fatal in such frost. Lubricating oil, designed for the European climate, thickened and turned into a substance resembling shoe glue in consistency. It no longer lubricates, it glues. At the parking area of the 3rd Panzer Division, a surreal picture reigns. Crews are building bonfires right under the bellies of their machines. This is a violation of all safety instructions. The risk of fire is 100%, but there is no choice. If the crankcase isn't warmed by open fire, the crankshaft cannot be turned even with a crowbar.
"Why are we standing?" An Oberleutnant runs up to the tank.
His face is wrapped in a wool scarf, from under which clouds of steam escape.
"The order to attack was received an hour ago."
"We can't start the engine," answers the sergeant major, lying on the snow. His hands are in grease and soot. He is trying to warm the oil pan with a torch.
"Gasoline doesn't evaporate. Plugs flood instantly. Batteries died last night. Electrolyte density dropped. They burst from the cold."
"Use the inertia starter. Crank it by hand," shouts the officer, his voice breaking into a squeal.
"We cranked with 4 men for half an hour."
Useless. The sergeant major stands up, wiping dirty hands on a white camouflage cape. "The oil holds the shaft like cement. The metal has shrunk. Pistons in cylinders are seized dead. This machine is dead, Oberleutnant."
"Until it gets warmer, it's just 50 tons of useless scrap metal."
German equipment, created for a comfortable war, dies from thermodynamic shock. Synthetic gasoline separates in the cold. Rubber tires on road wheels harden and crumble into crumbs when movement starts, if the tank can even be moved. Optics fog up from the inside and get covered with a crust of ice that cannot be scraped off without scratching the lenses. The complexity of the design, intended to ensure superiority, becomes shackles. And 2 kilometers away, in the forest, happens what German engineers consider technically impossible. A Soviet mechanic driver approaches a snowdrift, under which the outlines of a T-34 are guessed. The tank stood turned off all night. It is frozen through. The hull is covered in hoarfrost. The driver doesn't look for firewood for a fire. He doesn't call the crew to turn the crank starter. He climbs into the hatch and opens the valve of a compressed air tank. This is a brilliant solution of the Kharkov factory designers. Compressed air starting system. In conditions where batteries die and oil thickens, compressed air at a pressure of 150 atmospheres bursts directly into the cylinders. It doesn't need an electrical spark. It doesn't need chemistry. It needs only the brute kinetic energy of impact. A sharp hissing sound rings out. Psh! Compressed air hits the pistons, forcing the heavy crankshaft to turn by pneumatic force. The V2 diesel reluctantly but obeys. Following is the fuel ignition from compression. "Come on, darling, wake up," whispers the driver, looking at the trembling tachometer needle. The engine sneezes, ejecting black rings of thick, oily soot from the exhaust pipes. Another turn. One more. And suddenly, the forest is filled with a steady, powerful rumble. The diesel has started. 12 cylinders have come to life. Vibration shakes the snow off the armor. The tank, which seemed part of the winter landscape, turns into a living creature. Unlike German gasoline engines, diesel loves rough handling. Winter diesel fuel, diluted with kerosene, is pumped through the injectors. The cooling system is filled not with water, but with antifreeze, or just diesel fuel if nothing else is available. The V2 is omnivorous. It rumbles, clanks, but works. Heat from the engine begins to warm the transmission through the engine compartment bulkhead. This is the moment of truth. German perfectionism crashed against the Russian winter. Soviet primitivism adapted to it. Soviet tanks crawl out onto the battlefield. They are white, painted with lime, invisible against the snow. The Germans see them only when machine guns start working. German tanks stand as motionless targets. Their turrets don't rotate. The grease in the turret ring has frozen. Electric drives don't work without current. To turn the gunner needs to apply superhuman effort to the manual drive handwheel, but the gears won't budge. The T-34s maneuver. Their wide tracks don't sink into the deep snow. Ground pressure is calculated perfectly. They flank the immobilized panzers. "Target left! Distance 300! Armor piercing!" commands the Soviet lieutenant. Fire. The shell punches through the side of the German Panzer IV tank. It bursts into flames instantly. Gasoline vapors in the tanks detonate. The turret is blown off and thrown to the side. Burning gasoline spreads across the snow, creating a horrific contrast of fire and ice. A Soviet diesel, even if pierced, catches fire reluctantly. Diesel fuel flows but doesn't explode. This gives the crew seconds to leave the machine. The Germans don't have these seconds. On the Wehrmacht airwaves, panic. They scream not about tactics, they scream about the cold. Weapons fail. Carbine bolts freeze shut. Grease in MG-34 machine guns thickens, and they stop firing in bursts, turning into single-shot sticks. "The Russians have some secret winter fuel," reports a German radio operator to headquarters. "Their tanks move faster than in summer." There is no secret. There is simply simplicity of design, absence of unnecessary parts that can fail. Where a German engineer put a complex carburetor with automatic mixture adjustment, a Soviet engineer put a high-pressure plunger pump that will push through any sludge. Where a German put a delicate electric starter, a Soviet one put an air tank that works always, as long as it has pressure. The soundscape of the battle changes. Before, it was a symphony of shots. Now it is a solo of Soviet motors against the background of the dead silence of German positions. General Frost isn't fighting for the Russians. He is simply conducting a harsh technical audit. And German equipment failed this audit. A T-34 rushes past a frozen German tank. A mechanic leans out of the open hatch of the German machine. He doesn't shoot. He simply looks with a glazed stare at death passing by. His hands are black from frostbite. He tried to fix what cannot be fixed, an error in the machine's DNA. You cannot fight in Russia without respecting its climate. By evening, the thermometer drops to -35. The battlefield is strewn with black skeletons of burnt German machines. They look like monuments to human arrogance. Soviet tanks go further, to the west, tearing up the icy crust with their tracks. Their engines are not turned off even at halts. Silence for a diesel in such frost is death. As long as it rumbles, the crew is alive. As long as it eats fuel, the front moves. The war of technologies has moved into a new phase. The elegant German tool broke upon hitting an ice block. The Russian hammer, on the contrary, only became harder from the cold. The winter of 1941 proved reliability is more important than specifications. The ability to start at -30 is more important than armor thickness. Because a tank that didn't start is not a tank. It is a target. While German motors were dying of cold at the front, deep in the rear, in the Urals, an operation having no analogues in the history of engineering was taking place. It was a transplant of the country's industrial heart without anesthesia and stopping blood circulation. Evacuation. 1,500 major enterprises were torn from the earth of Ukraine and Belarus by the roots, loaded onto railway platforms, and thrown into the void of the snowy steppe. German analysts in Berlin, sitting in warm offices, calculated recovery logistics. They used slide rules and European standards. According to their calculations, launching a tank factory in a new location requires a minimum of 6 months. Pouring the foundation, erecting walls, installing bridge cranes, debugging equipment. They reported to Hitler, "Soviet tank industry is paralyzed until the summer of 1942. They have no machines, no roofs over their heads, no electricity." It was a fatal mistake of accountants trying to measure fury with algebra. In Nizhny Tagil and Chelyabinsk, civil construction laws were abolished. Only one law applied here, the law of wartime. Lathes were unloaded directly into snowbanks. Heavy vertical lathes and milling machines were placed on hastily assembled wooden sleepers frozen into the icy ground. Electricians dragged power cables through the snow, connecting equipment to temporary generators. Turners stood at the machines under the open sky when the temperature dropped to 40 below zero. Chips flying from under the cutter were hot, but they cooled before hitting the ground. Roofs of workshops were built over already operating lines. Walls were erected around people turning turret rings. Snow fell on parts, hissed on heated workpieces, but the conveyor didn't stop for a second. This wasn't a factory in the usual sense. It was a single organism feeding on electricity and human will, tuned to one function: the production of death for the enemy. In the workshops of Eurovagonzavod, a painful but necessary evolution of the T-34 design was taking place. Engineers, the same ones who just a year ago fought for every millimeter of aesthetics, were now ruthlessly cutting blueprints. The slogan, "Everything for the front," in the technologists' language meant, simplify everything that does not affect combat. The pre-war tank was complex. The tank of 1942 became as primitive as a cobblestone. Expensive rubber tires on road wheels disappeared. Rubber shortage. Now steel clanked against steel. The sound of the tank's movement became deafening. The crew went deaf. Vibration destroyed bearings, but the tank moved. Instead of 2 headlights, 1 remained. Instead of complex interior finishing, bare armor. The labor intensity of manufacturing one machine dropped from 8,000 man-hours to 3,700. The key technological breakthrough that broke the back of the German quality strategy was automatic submerged arc welding, the method of academician Peyton. German armor was welded by hand. This required welders of the highest qualification, an Aryan elite who were trained for years. The USSR didn't have such an elite. Men had gone to the front. Women and teenagers stood at the machines. Peyton's machine allowed making seams of perfect quality with the hands of yesterday's schoolboy. The welding head itself crawled along the joint of armor plates, burying the arc in flux. The seams turned out stronger than the armor itself. Welding speed increased 8-fold. While a German master in Essen carefully crafted a single seam on a Tiger, a Ural teenager welded sides for a dozen 34s. In the quality control department, a heated argument is underway. The QC chief, an old production man with peacetime habits, holds an acceptance act in his hands. His face is distorted by fatigue and anger. Before him stands the assembly shop foreman, whose hands tremble not from fear, but from overexertion. "I won't sign this!" shouts the QC chief, pointing at the tank turret. "Look at the casting. Cavities on the surface. Traces from the mold haven't been cleaned. And what is this? The weld seam isn't ground. This is scrap." "This isn't scrap. These are wartime tolerances," barks the foreman in response. "Does the armor hold?" "It holds." "Is the geometry normal?" "Normal." "Does the gun raise?" "Yes." "Who cares if the seam shines or not? This tank will burn in battle in an average of 3 attacks. Why would we spend 20 hours on polishing that no one needs?" "It's manufacturing culture," the inspector persists. "Culture now is one thing. Quantity," the foreman hits the armor with his fist. "Germans make 10 tanks a day, perfect ones. We must make 50. Rough, crooked, but 50. If we sand and polish, the Germans will be in Kazan in a month. Sign it." The QC chief looks into the foreman's eyes. There is no excuse in them, only hard calculation. He takes a pencil and puts a sweeping signature. Approved. Tanks leave the factory gates in an endless stream. They aren't even painted, straight to the platforms. Often crews receive machines right in the workshop and help workers tighten the last bolts. It is a fusion of rear and front. The driver sits in a seat that still holds the warmth of an assembler's hand. German industry works like a clock. But clocks tend to stop if sand gets into the mechanism. Soviet industry works like a mountain avalanche. It cannot be stopped, because it consists of millions of simple stones. Production statistics turn into a verdict. In 1942, USSR factories working under the open sky produced 25,000 tanks. Germany, possessing all the industrial power of Europe, produces fewer than 5,000. Every Soviet tank is a triumph of functionalism. It has nothing superfluous. No leather seats, no complex optics, only engine, gun, armor, and tracks. It is the idea of total war embodied in metal. "Look at these volumes," whispers a German intelligence officer, looking at aerial photography of a railway junction near Chelyabinsk. The photos are black and white, grainy, but they clearly show trains stretching beyond the horizon. On each platform, 2 tanks. This can't be. They don't have the resources.
Where do they get so much steel?
They don't get it, his colleague answers gloomily. They make it out of air and hatred. We made a mistake in calculations, Hans. We counted tanks like cars, and they bake them like pies.
On the platform stand T-34s with new nut turrets, cast hexagonal turrets, more technological, simpler, faster. The factory in Nizhny Tagil switches to assembly line production. Every 30 minutes, a new tank drives out of the gates. This rhythm is the metronome of war. Tick-tock, another tank. Tick-tock, another platoon. Tick-tock, battalion. This is no longer just production. It is a demographic explosion of machines. Quantity turns into the quality of a new strategic reality. The German wonder weapon and bespoke tigers that will appear later will clash not with individual heroes, but with an ocean of steel. An ocean born in the Ural snows, in roofless workshops, by the hands of hungry women and children who understood more about metallurgy than well-fed burghers in Bavaria. An avalanche from the Urals began its movement, at first slowly, gathering inertia. Clanking on rail joints, it rolled west, to where German repairmen were still trying to figure out how to fix a complex transmission in field conditions without a sterile laboratory at hand. They were about to learn that there is no defense against a sledgehammer, especially if that sledgehammer is produced on an industrial scale. The meeting of two civilizations was moving from the phase of maneuver warfare to the phase of war of attrition, where the Soviet sledgehammer had an infinite reserve of durability and the German scalpel already had a dulled blade. The battlefield freezes only on staff officers' maps. In reality, when the cannonade falls silent, another war begins. The War of Mechanics. It is a duel where wrenches are used instead of shells, and the winner is the one who returns a damaged machine to service faster. Here, in the mud of no man's land, or in a rear repair battalion, collide not just tanks, but two diametrically opposed concepts of maintenance. The German heavy tank Tiger, weighing 56 tons, stands on jacks. It is a masterpiece of engineering thought by Heinrich Kniepkamp. Its suspension ensures a smooth ride unattainable for other machines. The interleaved arrangement of road wheels distributes the giant's weight so evenly that it doesn't sink even in soft ground. But now, in conditions of real operation, this technical miracle has turned into a curse. To replace one inner road wheel damaged by a mine fragment, a German repair crew needs to dismantle half the running gear. "Remove the outer discs," yells the Oberfeldwebel, straining his voice. "Fourth, fifth, and sixth. Otherwise we won't get to the hub." Repairmen look like surgeons trying to perform open-heart surgery in a sewer manhole. They need a gantry crane. They need special pullers. They need a level concrete pad, because in the mud, jacks sink into the ground under the monstrous weight of the machine. Mud mixed with wet snow is packed between the wheels arranged in several rows. Overnight, this mass froze, turning into stone. It cannot be cleaned out. It must be chiseled out with crowbars, risking damage to the rubber tires. "Who designed this system?" growls the mechanic, skinning his hands to blood on the icy buildup. "In Berlin, do they think we have asphalt everywhere? To change a cheap oil seal, I have to disassemble 20 tons of iron." The German tank is designed as a modular system requiring factory service. It assumes the presence of developed rear infrastructure, spare parts warehouses, and qualified personnel. Broken final drive? Replace the whole unit. But the unit weighs hundreds of kilograms, and it's not in the warehouse because the train was bombed by partisans. The Tiger turns into real estate. The Wehrmacht's most powerful weapon drops out of the war not because of an armor-piercing shell, but because of a logistical dead end. 3 kilometers away, in a ravine, a Soviet crew is reanimating a T-34. The conditions are the same: mud up to the knees, freezing rain, fatigue. But the approach is different.
There are no cranes or special teams here. Here there is a sledgehammer, a crowbar, some mother, and brute physical force. The 34 has a broken idler wheel. For a German, this is a reason for evacuation to the factory. For a Russian, it's a reason for cursing and an hour of hard work. "Bring a log," commands the driver. "Put it under the track. We'll drive onto it now. It'll tighten itself." They use the weight of the tank itself as a tool. No hydraulic jacks? No problem.
The tank drives onto the log. The hull lifts. The track sags. The broken wheel is knocked off with sledgehammer blows. Micron tolerances aren't needed here. The seating surfaces are rough. The gaps are huge. A German engineer would be horrified by these gaps. "That's play! That's vibration! That's wear!" he would exclaim. The Soviet engineer knows mud that would jam a German mechanism will fly out through this gap. Agricultural tolerances, which Daimler-Benz experts laughed at, allow assemblies to work while packed with earth and sand. The driver takes a welding machine. Right here, in the rain. Sparks hiss, falling into a puddle. He welds a crack in the armor plate. The electrode sticks. The seam turns out crooked, looking like a scar, but it is airtight. "Michalich, the track pin is coming out," shouts the loader. "Hammer it back in," replies the commander, not looking up from cleaning the barrel with a ramrod. On the T-34, there are no complex stoppers for track pins. There is a simple metal deflector on the hull. If a pin starts to come out from vibration, it hits this deflector and is hammered back in. Genius primitivism. A design that services itself while moving. At the same time, German repairmen throw up their hands helplessly. They have run out of spare bolts with left-hand threads. Unique, marked, hardened bolts that cannot be replaced by anything else. "We can't put in a regular bolt," explains the non-commissioned officer to the tank commander. "It has a different thread pitch and different tensile strength. It will shear in a kilometer. We have to wait for a shipment from Germany." "Wait!" yells the tank ace, kicking the track of his immobile Tiger. "The Russians are already warming up their engines. I have a working gun, a working engine, but I can't drive because of the lack of 4 damned bolts." This is the collapse of the philosophy of perfectionism. German equipment is a scalpel. Sharp, precise, sterile. But wars are not won with a scalpel. Wars are won with a sledgehammer. A sledgehammer doesn't break. Even if the handle flies off, it can be wired back on, and it will continue to drive nails. The T-34 roared with its diesel. Black exhaust hit the damp sky. The tank, which an hour ago was knocked out, became a combat unit again. It is dirty. Inside it smells of burned oil and undried padded jackets, but it is alive. Its repairability is phenomenal. The engine and transmission are changed in field conditions in a day, wheels in an hour, tracks in minutes. The Soviet crew climbs inside. "Well, patched up?" asks the commander, taking his place in the turret. "Enough to get to Berlin, and there they'll give us new ones," grins the driver, wiping his hands with a rag blacker than night. They aren't afraid of breakdowns. They know. Everything made by human hands can be fixed by other human hands if you have wits and no fear of iron. And the Tiger remains standing. Mighty, formidable, but useless. It will become a trophy. When the front moves west, Soviet tractors will drag it to the proving ground in Kubinka, where engineers will long study its insides and shake their heads, wondering, how could one make such a magnificent and such unlivable machine? Complexity became vulnerability. The striving for the ideal led to paralysis. In the duel of repairmen, the winner was not the one with the better tool, but the one whose tool didn't require worship. The Soviet sledgehammer turned out to be more reliable than the German chronometer, simply because there was nothing in it to break that couldn't be fixed with a kick of a boot. The rain intensifies, washing away traces of oil from the armor. Tanks go into battle.
One gleaming with fresh weld seams, the other remaining to rust as a monument to technical arrogance. The logistics of war are ruthless. The winner is the one who shoots, not the one waiting for spare parts. And while the German repair company writes reports on the shortage of special wrenches, the Soviet tank battalion is already breaking through the defensive line on restored machines, proving Koshkin's theorem: simplicity is the highest form of reliability. July 1942. Voronezh steppes. If in winter the main enemy of mechanics was ice, now it was the sun. The air temperature in the shade exceeds 40 degrees Celsius, but there is no shade here. There is only scorched steppe, a horizon trembling from heat haze, and dust. Dust. It's not just dirt here. In these parts, it is loess, a tiny suspension, comparable in hardness to abrasive powder. It hangs in the air like a dense fog, kicked up by the tracks of thousands of machines. For internal combustion engines, a thermal hell arrived. German equipment, designed in the climatic comfort of Central Europe, encountered a phenomenon not present in Wehrmacht technical specifications: overheating. Inside a German Panzer IV tank, the temperature reaches 60 degrees. This is no longer a combat vehicle cabin. It is an oven. Crews strip to the waist, but sweat doesn't evaporate. It runs in streams, flooding eyes and instruments. But humans can endure. Iron cannot endure. Maybach gasoline engines start to choke. Gasoline boils right in the fuel lines at such temperatures. Vapor locks form. The fuel pump pumps not liquid, but hot gas, which cannot feed the carburetors. The motor sneezes, loses power, and stalls in the middle of a battle. "Water temperature 110!" shouts the German driver, looking at the dashboard with horror. "Oil pressure dropping! We are boiling, Hans!" "Cut the revs!" commands the commander, wiping his wet face. "Open the radiator louvers fully." "They are open! Fans aren't keeping up! Radiators are clogged with dust!" This is the second part of the catastrophe. German air filters are complex, multi-layered constructions made of felt and fabric. They are created to catch European road dust. But Russian loess is different. It instantly clogs the pores of the filter element. Air stops entering the engine. The mixture becomes over-rich. Spark plugs get covered in black soot. If you remove the filter to let the motor breathe, loess dust goes straight into the cylinders. There, it works like sandpaper. Piston rings wear out in a single forced march. The cylinder mirror gets covered in scratches. Compression drops. An engine whose resource was calculated for thousands of hours dies in 100 kilometers. German engineers are horrified. Their perfect motors are wearing out with catastrophic speed. And on the neighboring hill, raising a trail of gray cloud behind it, crawls a column of T-34s. They are hot too. The V2 diesel is working at the limit of its thermal regime. Water in the cooling system is boiling. Radiator cap valves vent steam with the hiss of an enraged snake. But the tanks keep going. The secret of the Soviet motor's survivability in these conditions lies not in assembly quality, but in the principle of air cleaning. On new modifications of 34s, they started installing cyclone-type filters. This is a primitive, rough, but brilliant system. It has no fine felt that needs changing every 2 hours. Centrifugal force works in it. Air is spun into a vortex, and heavy dust particles simply fly off to the walls and fall into a hopper, while clean air goes into the cylinders. The cyclone swallows dust by the kilogram and keeps working. It doesn't provide sterile cleanliness like the German filter in the first minutes of operation, but it provides stability. It doesn't clog dead. Inside the Soviet tank, conditions are inhuman. Ventilation is absent as a class. The fan on the engine pulls air from the fighting compartment, creating a draft, but this air is superheated. It is impossible to touch the armor with a bare hand. A burn is guaranteed. Powder gases from firing accumulate in the turret, causing nausea. The loader works in a semi-fainting state. His tunic is soaked with salt and has become stiff as a shell. "Water!" he wheezes, jamming another unitary cartridge into the breech. "Endure!" yells the commander. "The radiator needs it more." All the water the crew has goes to cooling the engine. People drink rusty, warm slurry from drain taps if they are lucky. But the machine is more important than the human. If the motor stops, everyone dies. "Oil 80, water 95, reports the driver. He sits in the very hell next to the transmission. Control levers are red hot. Clutches smoke. The smell of burning Ferroto friction material mixes with the smell of diesel and sweat. The T-34 breaks through the dust storm. The driver sees almost nothing. Periscopes are plastered with dust. He drives the machine by intuition and by flashes of gunfire. Dust penetrates everywhere. It grits on the crew's teeth. It packs into ears, noses, folds of clothing. But it doesn't stop the diesel. The German column has stopped. This isn't a tactical stop. It is a technical knockout. Panzer commanders are forced to shut off engines to avoid burning them out completely. They open engine compartment hatches, trying to cool the units. Tankers with buckets run to a dried-up stream, scooping muddy slurry to pour over radiators from the outside. It looks pathetic. The pinnacle of European technical thought, the formidable Panzer IVs and assault guns, stand as helpless boxes in the middle of the Russian steppe, defeated not by an armor-piercing shell, but by gas physics and thermodynamics. "Why are they driving?" asks a German gunner, looking through a trembling sight at approaching silhouettes of Soviet tanks. "Do they have different laws of physics?" "They have different tolerances," the commander answers gloomily, watching his machine turn into an immobile target. "Their gaps in the piston group are such that dust flies right through without jamming the piston. They built a machine that runs on dirt, and we built a machine that works in a laboratory." The duel in the Voronezh steppes showed perfection of design is the enemy of survival. The more complex the system, the more points of failure it has. The German cooling system with thermostats, clutches, and sensors goes crazy from the load. The Soviet system, pump, radiator, and fan on a shaft, simply pumps liquid. Rough? Yes. Effective? Absolutely. The Soviet tank climbs the crest of a hill. Black smoke mixed with sparks bursts from the exhaust pipes. This is oil burning out that got into the combustion chambers, but power doesn't drop. The V2 engine roars with a bass, drowning out the whistle of the wind. It devours dust, grinds it up, and spits it out, continuing to drag 30 tons of armor behind it. "Armor piercing! Fire!" shouts the Soviet commander. Shot. The casing falls to the floor of the fighting compartment with a ring, adding heat. The shell goes into the haze and finds the target. The German tank, standing with open engine hatches, bursts into flames. Gasoline vapors accumulated under the hood from overheating detonate in a volumetric explosion. A fireball rises into the sky, eclipsing the sun. The T-34 crew doesn't celebrate. They have no strength for emotions. They are dehydrated. Their heads spin. Dark spots float before their eyes. But hands do their work. The driver depresses the clutch, shifts gear, and the tank tears forward. Dust settles on the armor in a thick layer, turning the green tank into a gray ghost.
the steppe forgives no weakness. It tests equipment for strength with every cubic meter of superheated air, and this exam is passed not by those with chrome parts, but by those with a steel heart inside, capable of beating even in hell. The engineering philosophy of the USSR, simplicity and reliability, again beats German complexity and efficiency, because efficiency equals 0 if the engine has boiled. July 5th, 1943, the Kursk Bulge. This day was supposed to be the triumph of German engineering thought. Berlin went all in. Thrown into battle are not just new tanks, but a fundamentally new technological order. Operation Citadel relies not on strategy, but on Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons. For the first time, Panthers and heavy tank destroyers Ferdinand appear en masse at the front. On paper, these machines look like absolute predators. The Panther is the answer to the T-34. German designers, grudgingly, copied the sloped armor, admitting Koshkin was right. They installed a long-barreled gun with a muzzle velocity of 1,000 meters per second. It is a scalpel capable of opening any Soviet tank from a distance of 2 kilometers. But reality makes its corrections to the blueprints of the MAN company. Battalions of Panthers move to starting positions, and here begins a technical nightmare that no Soviet deputy commander for technical affairs saw in his worst dream. Tanks start burning, by themselves, without a single enemy shot. "Engine is on fire!" shouts the driver of the lead vehicle, tearing off the hatch lock. "Fourth compartment on fire!" A column of greasy black smoke erupts from the Panther's engine compartment. The crew abandons the machine in panic. The cause is not a mine, not a shell, but a design flaw. The Maybach HL230 engine is tuned to the limit. The cooling system can't cope. Fuel pumps leak. Gasoline drips onto red-hot exhaust manifolds. Hull sealing, done for crossing water obstacles, turns the engine compartment into a sealed oven without ventilation. "This is sabotage," yells the battalion commander, watching 2 newest machines turn into torches on the march. "They break from their own weight." "It's not sabotage, Herr Major," the technical officer answers gloomily. "It's haste. We received raw prototypes. The transmission doesn't hold the torque. Final drives shatter every 30 kilometers. We are losing the battalion even before meeting the Russians." The statistics are horrifying. Of the 200 Panthers that arrived at Kursk, only a small part reaches the front line in combat-ready condition. The rest stand on roadsides with open hoods, surrounded by cursing repairmen. German perfectionism crashed against Hitler's desire to get the weapon immediately. The complexity of the design, requiring years of fine-tuning, became a death sentence. And on the other flank, Ferdinand's crawl, 65 tons, front 200 millimeters of steel, Professor Porsche's electric transmission. 2 engines turn generators, generators power electric motors. No drive shafts. Technical science fiction. This self-propelled gun can destroy every living thing on the horizon. But the Ferdinand has one small detail that designers forgot in the pursuit of caliber. It has no hull machine gun. Engineers calculated that such a powerful machine shouldn't let infantry close. It was a mistake, costing the crew's life. July 12th, Prokhorovka, the climax of the battle. General Rotmistrov gives an order contradicting all tank combat manuals. "Full speed!" "Close in!" This is the only chance for Soviet equipment. The T-34, with its 76mm gun, cannot penetrate the front of a Tiger or Ferdinand, even at point-blank range. German tanks are snipers. Soviet tanks are boxers. To win, a boxer must get into a clinch, where the sniper's rifle becomes a useless club. An avalanche of 34s rushes across the field. Diesels roar at the tearing point. Speed, 55 kilometers per hour. Tanks jump on bumps, clanking tracks. Crews don't shoot.
Shooting at such speed is useless. The main task is to close the distance, to pass the death zone of 1.5 kilometers where German guns rule. German gunners are going crazy. Too many targets. They dart around in their sights. "Too fast!" shouts the gunner of a Tiger. "I can't rotate the turret fast enough. Hydraulics are slow." The heavy turret of the Tiger turns majestically and smoothly. But Soviet tanks flash by faster. Here they are already close. The tank battle turns into a brawl. Firing ranges, 50, 30, 10 meters. Armor isn't important here anymore. Maneuverability and rate of fire are important here. A T-34 approaches a Tiger's side. Point-blank shot. The shell punches through the side armor where fuel tanks and ammo racks are located. An explosion rips off the German giant's multi-ton turret. "Ram!" yells the Soviet tank commander when he runs out of shells. "Hit him head on!" 30 tons of Soviet steel at full speed slam into the side of a Tiger. An impact of monstrous force. Crews inside get concussions, break ribs on gun breaches. But the German machine suffers more. The vaunted transmission doesn't withstand the lateral blow. Gears burst, shafts twist into screws. The Tiger is immobilized. And the Soviet tank, with a smashed nose, with a torn track, continues to fire from its machine gun. On the battlefield, the roar is such that blood flows from ears. The air has turned into a solid substance of dust and smoke. Visibility is zero. In this chaos, complex German optical rangefinders are useless. Their coated lenses shatter from nearby high-explosive blasts. Tanks go blind. Ferdinands, left without cover, become victims of infantry. Soviet soldiers run up to the steel monsters close up and throw bottles of incendiary mixture onto engine grates. The electric transmission flares up, shorting circuits. "We are blind!" shouts the Ferdinand commander. "Infantry on the armor! Where is the machine gun? Why is there no machine gun?" He shoots a pistol through the hatch for ejecting shell casings, but this is agony. Ferdinand Porsche's masterpiece, costing millions of Reichsmarks, burns from a penny bottle of gasoline because the designer considered a machine gun an unnecessary atavism. By evening, the field near Prokhorovka is covered in acrid smoke, hundreds of burning machines. A collision of two philosophies occurred here.
The German bet on unique characteristics.
On the silver bullet, lost. The Soviet bet on mass numbers, reliability, and close combat, won. German tankers surviving this meat grinder sit on the ground, holding their heads in their hands. They are in shock. Their equipment, which showed miracles of accuracy on the proving ground, failed in real combat. Complex aiming mechanisms got knocked out, electronics shorted, engines overheated. "My sight cost as much as their whole tank," mumbles a captured Oberleutnant, looking at a soot-covered T-34 towing a captured Tiger. But the glass cracked from vibration, and they aim through a hole in the armor and hit. This was a verdict on technical snobbery. The Kursk bulge showed that in war, reliability is more important than millimeters, and repairability is more important than comfort. Panthers, burned by their own motors, became a symbol of the collapse of the German engineering school, which, trying to create an ideal machine, forgot that it would have to fight in an imperfect world. The Soviet sledgehammer turned out to be bent, nicked, but whole. The German scalpel snapped in half. And now, when the spine of the Panzerwaffe was broken, this sledgehammer was raised for a retaliatory strike from which there would be no recovery. The initiative passed to those who built tanks not for parades, but for killing. 1944. The geography of war shrinks like shagreen leather. Now the movement vector is directed strictly west, and the speed of this movement is dictated not by a staff map, but by engine life. the great march across the ruins of Europe begins. It is a race for mechanical survival, where victory goes not to the one who hits harder, but to the one who drives longer. Soviet tank armies cover 500 kilometers in a single offensive operation. This is an extreme load. By all peacetime technical standards, the V2 tank diesel should have died 200 engine hours ago. Piston rings are worn to the thickness of foil. Oil pressure in the system drops to a critical mark, making drivers go cold with horror at every glance at the gauge. Track pins, battered by thousands of versts of off-road driving, hold on a wing and a prayer and a piece of wire. But the columns move. The T-34 model of 1944 is no longer that raw machine that burned near Mtsensk. It is a tired, dirty beast rattling with all its joints, but incredibly tenacious. It leaks oil, it smokes, it requires constant bolt tightening at halts, but it doesn't stop. "Pressure is 1!" shouts the driver through the transmission noise. "The light is blinking!" "Screw it," replies the commander. "Pour a bucket of fuel oil straight into the tank."
It'll chew it up.
And the engine chews. The Soviet design school built such a reserve of barbaric durability into this unit that it works even when, according to the laws of physics, it shouldn't. Worn parts have lapped against each other, forming a unique symbiosis of play and gaps. The machine became an extension of the crew. It is fixed on the move, using improvised means. A burst hose is wrapped in captured electrical tape. A punctured radiator is plugged with a wooden stopper. A completely different picture opens on the roadsides of German roads. Here lies a graveyard of the Third Reich's technological ambitions. Huge, awe-inspiring King Tigers, 70 tons of alloy steel, frontal armor, 150 millimeters at a rational slope angle, an 88 millimeter caliber gun capable of destroying any Allied tank from a distance of 2.5 kilometers, the top of the armored vehicle food chain. But these monsters stand quietly and meekly, burying their powerful barrels in the ground. There are no penetration marks on their armor. They are whole. They are dead. The cause of death is banal and humiliating for Aryan genius. Fuel. The 70-ton King Tiger devours 700 liters of synthetic gasoline per 100 kilometers of off-road travel. This isn't a machine. It's a black hole for resources. When Romanian oil fields are lost and synthetic fuel plants are bombed by Allied aviation, this appetite becomes fatal. A German tank ace can be a hero 3 times over, but without gasoline, his tank turns into an immobile steel pillbox, and a pillbox in maneuver warfare is just scenery. A Soviet column passes by an abandoned company of Tiger IIs. A 34 driver slows down to examine the defeated giants. "Look, Commander," he says, pointing to the open engine hatch of a German tank. "Clean. Not a scratch."
Abandon the bastards.
Their final drive blew, the commander determines with an experienced eye. See the track is thrown? Gear teeth sheared off. This is the second Achilles heel of the German heavyweights. Weight grew to 70 tons, but the transmission and final drives were left from 40-ton machines. Metal doesn't withstand the torque. Gears made with jewelry precision crumble into dust during an attempt at a sharp jerk. The German engineer calculated strength for ideal conditions, but forgot to multiply the load by the coefficient of panic during retreat. "Rich machine," spits the loader, looking at the powerful muzzle brake of the Tiger. "But it's as useful as milk from a billy goat, standing there, rusting. And our Swallow crawled half of Europe on its belly, and will make it to the ocean." Swallow. That's what they call their tank. Not Stalin's fist, not weapon of retribution. Swallow.
In this word is the whole essence of the Russian soldier's attitude toward iron.
He doesn't pray to it like a German to his Wunderwaffe. He loves it like a living being, forgives its whims, treats its wounds, and knows that in a critical moment, the machine will reciprocate. The road to the west is clogged with abandoned Wehrmacht equipment. Here are Panthers and Jagdtiger self-propelled guns and armored personnel carriers. All of this is abandoned due to a lack of spare parts or fuel. Logistical collapse. The most perfect army in the world turned into pedestrians because it created equipment that doesn't know how to live autonomously. The Soviet tank drags extra barrels of diesel on its stern. It is dangerous. One hit, and the crew will burn alive. But it is necessary. Range is life. Soviet engineers provided for the installation of external tanks back on the blueprints. German engineers thought the rear echelon should bring fuel. The rear echelon is no more.
Through the cloudy glass of the periscope, the driver sees the burning German land. Neat, gingerbread towns with tiled roofs turn into ruins under the tracks. But there is no pity. There is only fatigue and an understanding of the job. "Lever jammed," complains the driver, trying to turn the machine on a narrow street. "Clutch is slipping." "Hit the linkage with the sledgehammer," advises the commander. "Mud got in there." The driver hits. A clank rings out, and the lever yields. The tank turns, taking out the corner of a brick house. Brute force wins again. If the complex control hydraulics of a Tiger jammed, the crew would be writing a report to scrap the machine. Here, the problem is solved with a blow. 1945 meets them not with salutes, but with the smoke of fires. Equipment resource is used up to 200%. Gun barrels are shot out. Rifling inside is almost worn away. Accuracy has dropped. Shells fly in that direction. But there are many of them. The density of fire compensates for all production flaws and wear. German soldiers sitting in trenches with Faust patrons see an approaching wall of steel. They know their King Tigers are standing 10 kilometers back, useless and cold. They understand that the war was lost not when Berlin fell, but when their engineers bet on complexity against endurance. "Another 50 kilometers and we'll stop for repairs," promises the commander, though he doesn't believe it himself. "We'll swap the engine, clean the filters." "It'll make it," the driver says confidently, stroking the lever. "She's double-sinewed. Just give her diesel, and she'll drive into the afterlife and bring you back out." The view through the periscope becomes a metaphor for the finale. Ahead, the agonizing Reich. Behind, thousands of kilometers of roads strewn with broken, abandoned, perfectly designed German machines that failed the main test. The test of survival in chaos. Power without movement is nothing. Soviet tanks, rattling like buckets of bolts, proved that movement is victory. May 1945, Berlin. The silence hanging over the ruins of the Reich's capital deafens louder than artillery cannonade. On the outskirts of the city, on giant wastelands, collection points for captured equipment are organized. This is a graveyard of ambitions, where burnt Panthers, torn to pieces Tigers, and intact but abandoned Jagdpanther tank destroyers stand mixed together. Here, under guard, German technical specialists are brought. Engineers from Henschel, MAN, Daimler-Benz, people who designed the best tanks in the world. Now they are prisoners, experts on someone else's triumph. They are ordered to disassemble and analyze a Soviet T-34-85 tank standing in the center of the site. It is dirty, with soot marks on the armor, but it is here, in Berlin, as a victor. An elderly German engineer who devoted his whole life to precision mechanics approaches the Soviet machine. He runs his hand over the turret. His fingers feel the roughness of the casting. The metal is bumpy, untreated. At the joint of the armor plates, a weld seam is visible. It is rough, uneven with sags. The electrode went unevenly. "Look at this," he says to his colleague, pointing to the armor edge. "This is barbarism. They didn't even bother to clean off the scale. Casting tolerances, plus or minus 5 millimeters. In our school, you'd be fired with a wolf ticket for this." The colleague, a former transmission designer, nods gloomily. He just climbed out of the driver's hatch. His hands are in oil. "I examined the gearbox," he says quietly.
Gears are machined only at the contact point. The rest of the surface is raw casting. Control levers are just pieces of pipe, no ergonomics. The seat is plywood with canvas. They look at each other, and cognitive dissonance is read in their eyes. According to their worldview, this crude craft couldn't defeat their technical masterpieces. Their Tigers had stereoscopic rangefinders, semi-automatic gearboxes, steering wheels instead of levers, ventilation with filtration. Every German tank was a work of art created for dominance. But right here, on the dump of history, a terrible realization comes to them. "We built machines for jousting tournaments," utters the old engineer, wiping his glasses. "We thought war was a duel, where the winner is the one with the longer sword and lighter step. We calculated penetration coefficients and viewing angles. We created ideal mechanisms for ideal conditions." He kicks the track of the T-34.
But the Russians built a machine for killing. They understood what we didn't. War isn't a tournament. War is mud, blood, and mass production. While we spent 100,000 man-hours on one Tiger perfecting it, they riveted 10 of these rough, ugly ducklings. And these ugly ducklings drove to Berlin, while our perfect machines were left rusting in Polish swamps. This is the moment of truth. The German engineering school, which made a cult of complexity, lost to the Soviet school, which made a cult of functionality. Germans tried to solve problems by adding new assemblies. Tank heavy? Add power steering. Bad visibility? Add complex optics. Russians solved problems by cutting off the excess. Tank heavy? Remove comfort. Bad visibility? The commander will lean out of the hatch. "Look at this engine," continues the transmission designer. V2, aluminum, diesel. They stole aviation technologies and shoved them into a tractor. It leaks oil, it smokes, it vibrates so teeth chatter. But it runs on any slurry that can be set on fire. And our Maybachs required premium gasoline, which we didn't have even back in '44. Their dialogue is an epitaph to perfectionism. Perfection became the enemy of good. The desire to make it better led to equipment becoming unfit for total war. Complex bearings required complex grease. Complex electronics required scarce copper. Complex suspension required qualified repair. The Soviet T-34 tank became the embodiment of the principle necessary and sufficient. It had not a single part that didn't serve the main goal, to shoot and destroy. Everything else, comfort, aesthetics, resource life, was sacrificed for production speed and reliability in combat. "We didn't lose to soldiers," summarizes the old engineer, walking away from the tank. "We lost to factory conveyors. We lost to a philosophy. We wanted to make a surgeon's instrument, and they made a sledgehammer. And in a fight in a dark alley, a sledgehammer is always more effective than a scalpel." The Soviet design school emerged from this war with a unique genetic code. This code is extreme simplicity, repairability on the knee, and standardization. This experience, paid for by millions of lives and thousands of burned machines, formed the basis of the entire post-war military industry of the superpower. The T-34-85 stands on the Berlin wasteland not just as a tank. It is a monument to engineering rationalism. Its design proved reliability is more important than tactical and technical characteristics. The ability to fix a machine in the field is more important than armor thickness. Quantity multiplied by simplicity becomes a new quality. In the future, this principle will spawn the Kalashnikov assault rifle, a weapon that works in sand and water. It will spawn reliable rocket tractors and Soyuz spacecraft that fly for decades. Soviet engineering thought forever learned the lesson of 1941. Technology must be an extension of the soldier, not a burden on him. German engineers leave under escort. Behind their backs stands a machine that rewrote textbooks on design. It is ugly. It has rough seams. It has a cramped turret. But it won. Because in war, beauty is measured not by the shine of lacquer, but by the ability to reach the enemy capital. The Soviet sledgehammer smashed the German chronometer, proving that in the mechanics of death, simplicity is the highest form of perfection.